I'm Dr. Duke with The New American, and I am going to reiterate what I reiterated a week ago with a lot more evidence and a lot more reason about it is time to put Americans back to work. We have a really interesting situation in this country now where it has been suggested by a number of Republicans, it's been suggested vaguely by Donald Trump, that maybe we ought to bring the Congress back to Washington to begin to deal with some of these issues. Congress, as you know, is on leave, is on holiday, so to speak, through the first part of May. So technically, the Congress does not have to be in session. But many are calling for Congress to get back to work, to go to Washington and to start to deal with some of the issues we're having, in particularly how to help the country get back to work. The Democrats, being Democrats, refuse to go back to work, saying that it's too dangerous. It's too dangerous for us to go back to Washington, D.C. and do our job governing the country. And so you've got an American populace, many of whom want to go back to work. You have an American states, American communities that want to get back to work. And you have a Congress that says it's too dangerous for us to oversee any of this. There's a deep divide now between our political class and our intellectual class and what everyday Americans want to do. And I'm siding with everyday Americans. As somebody who teaches at a university, I see people with PhDs all the time. If you actually believe a PhD translates into intelligence, let me sell you some lakefront property in Montana, because oceanside property in Montana, because it ain't true. You stay in college. I figured this out. You stay in college long enough, pay them enough money, they will give you any degree eventually. And I say this as somebody who teaches at universities, has a master's degree and a PhD. I side with the people on this. Somebody made a really brilliant point this last week, that why are we holding the country at hostage as if it were New York City? This made a lot of news. You think about where the virus has hit the hardest, it's in New York City. And New York City, of course, is a incredibly I think it's about 8 miles of incredibly concentrated population. Something like 8 million people live in the city in a very relatively small area. Everybody rides the subway. Everybody walks. Jam stores. It's an overcrowded city that the primary method of transport is getting in small subway cars underground. No wonder it hit there hardest, and no wonder it's much harder to contain. And this shouldn't surprise anybody, but if you're living in Texas, or you're living in Wisconsin, or you're living in Iowa, where there's a much greater distances, much more open spaces, where you don't have the kind of crushing people living on top of each other that you have in the major cities, why should you be exposed to the same harsh regimen of not working, of not going out, of not visiting your parks, of not fishing or playing golf that you see in tiny, tiny crowded cities, relatively speaking, tiny area space cities? So in Wisconsin this week, we had our biggest turnout yet in the streets in Madison the other day, protesting, let's get back to work, let's open things up again. Rather than consider this, our lockdown was supposed to end April 24th. But before we even got close to that, it was pushed all the way to May 26th by our Democrat governor. And the protest was about this. Our legislature, our legislature in Wisconsin, our Senate and our Assembly are suing to the Supreme Court of Wisconsin to force the governor to open up aspects of commerce again. We have major corporate food producers like Tyson saying now that there's an impending disaster just around the corner, that the food chain has been broken, that the stable supply of steadily meted out food to American grocery stores is broken. There's about 1 million chickens, millions, I should say, of chickens about to be killed because there is no one there to look after them because the work is closed. We have had hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pigs slaughtered. There is more frozen meat sitting in freezers idle because of no one to ship it, no one to process it, no one to unpack it and sell it. We find ourselves in a really dangerous situation where in short order, the consequences of not opening and going back to work, starting our economy, putting people to work again, is going to be much higher than this plague is, this pandemic is. And you think about what I said to open this little discussion. You've got the Republicans are ready to go. The Democrats in Congress don't want to go back. Technically, they don't have to until the early part of May, but they don't want to do this. And let's just ask ourselves a question. What benefit is it to prolong this quarantine? What benefit is it to prolong? And by prolonging the quarantine, what you're suggesting is we're prolonging the degree to which the pandemic itself is going to be a major issue in American politics. What benefits it Republicans to keep doing it? What benefits? There's very little benefit. But Republicans who control the Senate and the presidency, they are being hammered. Donald Trump, the Democrats have finally found an issue that they can absolutely torpedo his presidency with. Why would they give that up? Now ask yourself what benefits the Democrats. What are the Democrats asking for? What were they asking for before the pandemic? More social services, more tax money collected, more government handouts, more basic income, monthly basic income for people. Pay people basically to be Americans. With the exception of immigration, which has come to a halt. Every aspect of this pandemic and its corresponding shutdown benefits progressive causes. Go even further than that. You're expanding the welfare base. You're expanding the unemployment base. You are actually paying out more. Oh, remember right before the pandemic hit how the Democrats were grumbling that people weren't using all this food stamp money? That more people than in the last 50 years had dropped off of food stamps and blaming Donald Trump that was actually hurting the economy, that more people weren't on food stamps. Guess what this virus is doing? It's ratcheting up the SNAP programs and the food stamp programs. We've also heard, how many of you heard poorly informed, scientifically deprived global warmists out there talking about how, well, gee, isn't this amazing? We're doing it, they say. They come out and celebrating the virus. This virus has given us an opportunity to see if we shut down all commerce, how the planet loves us. And why? Because nobody's picking up shells that are washing up on the beach. The beach is becoming littered with shells because no one's there to pick them up, because some turtles and other kinds of animals are taking advantage of the lack of human presence to actually make appearances. This, to the cult of global warming, is the success of a pandemic. And so they're cheering that this is the way it ought to be. Take first world countries, make them third world countries, and watch how the planet thrives by that. All those, and I don't really hear PETA complaining much about all of those hundreds of thousands of slaughtered hogs that may not be able to be eaten now. Those millions of chickens now that were killed, don't see a lot of grief from PETA, because PETA understand with PETA that their ultimate aim is a globalist aim, as is true of the environmentalists and as is true of our Democratic friends in Washington. Every day this goes on, it's less likely that Donald Trump will be reelected president in the fall, and that may or may not be deserved. But the idea that we're going to artificially keep people from working, we're going to treat the entire country of the United States. One of the features of the United States is how big it is, how expansive it is. People seem to think that overpopulation in America is a huge deal. When you look at the actual populations of centers of this country and you look at where there are no people living, it's staggering how much space there is, how much room for people to get back to business safely, how much, particularly outside, again, of places like Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York, where you have that kind of urban sprawl. And let me ask you that urban overpopulation. And isn't it my imagination? Or was it Agenda 2130 for the United Nations? Was it Barack Obama arguing that we had to move all people off the land? We had to get rid of suburbs. We have to take people out of the suburbs, out of the country, take their land from them, like we saw with the Bundy family, take their property, seize all these people who are living rurally, force them into big cities. We should have 99% of our population living in a handful of huge cities. What would have happened if that had been accomplished by the United Nations and we were all living in places like New York? How much worse would the epidemic be right now? How much worse would the pandemic be right now if the globalists at the UN and their Democrat surrogates had gotten their way and more American people had been jammed into small urban housing in big cities? You'd have a huge problem now. And that problem, I hate to say it, that problem exists because of Democrat policies, because of globalist policies, and because of our response to this virus. We were careful, we were cautious, we voluntarily suspended our lives for 2 months. But the tide is breaking. Those states that are getting back to work don't seem to be having problems yet. Even in Wisconsin, where we actually had a physical vote. Remember that a month ago? Everybody said you're going to infect everybody. Why don't you have mail-in votes? No, we went ahead and had an actual vote, and there does not appear to be any almost zero new infections. Wisconsin's number have not spiked. We can do that for all of us. Thanks for joining us. I'm Dr. Nuke with The New American, and this has been my take on the news.